My name is Mason Davis, and I'm 32 years old. I always thought being the responsible older brother would eventually earn my parents' respect. I was wrong. Last month, I discovered they had emptied my $500,000 trust fund, money my grandmother left specifically for me, to spoil my sister Kimberly. They assumed I'd stay quiet like always. What they didn't know was that Grandma Eleanor had installed a protection clause they never knew about. If you're watching this from somewhere cozy, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Hit like and subscribe to hear how my parents' smug faces fell when they realized what they'd done. I grew up in a comfortable suburb outside Boston in a 4-bedroom colonial that my father Robert, a successful accountant, was proud to have purchased before his 30th birthday. My mother Susan worked as an elementary school teacher before quitting to focus on raising me and my sister Kimberly, who is 4 years younger. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family: annual vacation photos at Cape Cod, honor roll certificates on the refrigerator, and matching outfits for holiday cards. But inside our home, the dynamic was always clear. Kimberly was the golden child, and I was the reliable afterthought. I can't pinpoint exactly when I realized this truth. Maybe it was when I won the state science fair in 5th grade and my parents missed the ceremony because Kimberly had a dance recital. Or perhaps it was during my high school graduation when they left early because Kimberly, a freshman, had a mild headache. The pattern was consistent and unmistakable throughout my childhood. Mason is so self-sufficient, my mother would tell relatives with a smile that never reached her eyes. He never needs anything. The truth was that I'd learned early not to ask for things. Asking meant disappointment. It meant watching my parents exchange that look, the one that said, "Can't he handle this himself?" Meanwhile, Kimberly's demands were met with immediate action. Her tears treated like emergencies. When I was 10, my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother, visited for an extended stay while recovering from hip surgery. Grandma Eleanor was different. She noticed things. She watched how I quietly did my homework without being reminded, how I helped with dishes without being asked, how I retreated to my room when Kimberly threw tantrums to get her way. One afternoon, while my parents were at one of Kimberly's dance competitions, Grandma Eleanor called me to sit with her on the porch swing. "You're a special kind of person, Mason," she said, her weathered hand patting mine. "The kind who sees what needs to be done and does it without fanfare. The world needs more people like you." I remember feeling seen for the first time in my own home. A week later, Grandma Eleanor informed my parents that she had established a trust fund for me. I wasn't supposed to overhear the conversation, but I was getting water in the kitchen when their voices carried from the living room. "Mason will need support for college and beyond," she stated firmly. "I've set aside $250,000 that will grow until he's 30. The money is for him, specifically for him, to use for education, a home purchase, or whatever foundation he needs to build his future." "Mom, that's incredibly generous," my father replied, "but we can provide for both our children equally. There's no need." "This isn't about equal, Robert," Grandma Eleanor interrupted. "This is about fair. I've watched how things work in this house. I'm ensuring Mason has something that's just for him." My mother's voice turned cold. "Are you suggesting we favor Kimberly?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Grandma Eleanor replied calmly. "I'm stating facts and making my own decisions about my money." The trust fund became a sore subject in our home. My parents never discussed it with me directly, but occasionally I'd overhear tense phone calls with Grandma Eleanor about unnecessary interference and undermining parental authority. As years passed, Grandma Eleanor remained my steadfast supporter. During our regular Sunday phone calls and summer visits to her home in Vermont, she would ask about my goals, celebrate my achievements, and occasionally drop warnings about financial responsibility. "Your parents mean well," she would say, "but they've never understood the difference between needs and wants. Be careful about financial entanglements with them." I excelled academically through high school, graduating as valedictorian and earning a substantial scholarship to Cornell University. My parents attended the graduation ceremony but left before my speech to help Kimberly prepare for her junior prom. I told myself it didn't matter. I had Grandma Eleanor beaming in the front row, recording every word. College was liberating. I double majored in finance and economics, worked part-time to cover personal expenses, and built a network of genuine friendships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Meanwhile, Kimberly struggled in her expensive private high school, requiring tutors my parents eagerly provided and forgiveness for mediocre grades they readily offered. "Your sister is more creative than academic," my mother explained during one holiday break when I questioned the double standard. "We can't all be naturally disciplined like you." After graduating with honors, I secured a position at a respected financial firm in Boston. I worked diligently, earned promotions, and began building my own investment portfolio. By 30, I had a comfortable emergency fund, a growing retirement account, and a reputation as a skilled analyst. The trust from Grandma Eleanor remained untouched. I viewed it as a future foundation, not an ATM for immediate desires. Kimberly's path was less structured. She attended 3 different colleges before graduating with a general studies degree. My parents funded each transfer, each apartment, each new car when she grew tired of the previous one. After college, she cycled through jobs, quitting whenever she felt unfulfilled or underappreciated. My parents subsidized her lifestyle between employment gaps, always with the explanation that finding yourself takes time. When I was 28, Grandma Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her loss gutted me. At the funeral, I delivered a eulogy that caused even my stoic father to wipe away tears. Afterward, Grandma Eleanor's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, informed me that she had amended my trust fund over the years, increasing the principal to $500,000 and adding specific provisions for its management. "She was extremely proud of you," Mr. Peterson said, handing me a sealed envelope. "She asked that you read this privately when you're ready." That night, alone in my apartment, I opened Grandma Eleanor's letter. "My dearest Mason, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever adventure comes next. Don't grieve too long. I've had a full life rich with love, chief among it my love for you. You've grown into exactly the man I knew you would be, responsible, kind, and strong in quiet ways many people never understand. The trust fund has matured nicely. Use it wisely. But don't forget to use some of it for joy. A solid foundation isn't just about practical necessities. It should include space for dreams. I've added some protections to the trust that Mr. Peterson can explain. Not because I don't trust you, I trust you implicitly, but because I know the pressures family can exert. Your generosity is one of your finest qualities. But it shouldn't come at the expense of your future. Remember always, you matter. Your needs matter. Your dreams matter. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. With eternal love, Grandma Eleanor." I kept that letter in my bedside drawer, reading it whenever family dynamics threatened to pull me back into old patterns of self-doubt. Little did I know how prophetic Grandma Eleanor's concerns about family pressure would prove to be. I turned 32 last March and decided it was finally time to purchase my first home. Boston's real estate market was competitive, but I had saved a solid down payment from my salary. With the addition of the trust fund, I could afford a small but well-located condo without stretching my finances. The first unusual sign came on a Tuesday morning in April. I was reviewing client portfolios at work when my phone pinged with a bank notification. "Confirmation of wire transfer complete." I frowned, not recalling initiating any transfers, especially not from my trust account, which I rarely accessed. When I logged into the account during my lunch break, my stomach dropped. A wire transfer for $75,000 had been processed that morning. Scrolling through the recent activity, I discovered 5 similar withdrawals over the previous 6 months, each ranging from $50,000 to $100,000. I immediately called the bank's trust department. "Mr. Davis, those transfers were authorized with the proper documentation," the representative explained. "The request came through your parents as secondary trustees, with signed authorization forms." "I never signed any authorization forms," I said, my voice tight. "Sir, I can only tell you what our records show. Perhaps you should speak with your family." I left work early, driving the 40 minutes to my parents' house in a daze of confusion and rising anger. I found them in the kitchen, my mother chopping vegetables for dinner, my father reading the newspaper at the counter, the picture of suburban normalcy. "Did you withdraw money from my trust fund?" I asked without preamble. My mother's knife paused mid-chop. My father lowered his newspaper. They exchanged a glance before my father cleared his throat. "We were going to discuss this with you," he said in his reasonable accountant voice. "We've had to make some financial adjustments to help Kimberly get established." "Established?" I repeated. "You took over $450,000 from my trust fund without telling me." "That's not helping, that's theft." My mother's expression hardened. "Don't be dramatic, Mason. It's family money helping family." "It wasn't family money. It was my money. Specifically designated for me by Grandma Eleanor. Your grandmother didn't understand our family's needs," my father said dismissively. "Kimberly is getting married to Ethan next month. They needed help with a down payment on their house. And she's finally found her passion with that boutique clothing business. These are important life milestones that require support." "And my life milestones don't matter?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. My mother sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "You're doing fine financially, Mason. You've always been self-sufficient. Kimberly needs this boost to get started. You'll still have plenty left in the trust." "I don't have plenty left. You've taken almost all of it. There's barely $50,000 remaining out of $500,000. My father shrugged. "You make good money at your job. Kimberly's still establishing herself." The casual way they dismissed my feelings, my rights, and my grandmother's explicit wishes struck me like a physical blow. They hadn't even planned to tell me. If I hadn't received that bank notification, would I ever have known? That evening, my parents invited Kimberly and her fiancé Ethan over for dinner, apparently thinking a family meal would smooth everything over. When they arrived, Kimberly bounced in wearing designer clothes, flashing a new diamond tennis bracelet that complemented her massive engagement ring. "Mason!" she squealed, air kissing near my cheek. "Mom says you're being weird about the trust fund thing." "Don't be such a stick in the mud. You should see the house Ethan and I bought. It's absolutely perfect. 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and the master bath has heated floors." Ethan, a pleasant but passive man who worked in pharmaceutical sales, looked uncomfortable. "The house is really nice," he offered weakly. "Your sister has amazing taste." "I'm sure she does," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. $500,000 buys a lot of taste. Kimberly rolled her eyes. "Don't be bitter. It's just money. You've always been good at saving. Besides, my boutique is going to be a huge success. I've already ordered inventory from Paris and Milan. Everyone says my eye for fashion is exceptional." Throughout dinner, my parents and Kimberly chatted about wedding plans, house renovations, and the boutique's upcoming grand opening. They discussed all the things my trust fund was paying for without once acknowledging the source or seeking my input. I sat silently, feeling invisible in my own family drama, a familiar sensation from childhood but now amplified by the magnitude of their betrayal. After Kimberly and Ethan left, my father tried to close the matter. "Look, what's done is done. The money has been spent. Your sister's wedding is in 4 weeks. Let's move past this for the sake of family harmony." "Family harmony?" I repeated incredulously. You stole from me and expect me to just accept it for harmony? We didn't steal, my mother snapped. We redirected funds to where they were needed most. Honestly, Mason, your selfishness is disappointing. I left their house that night with my mind spinning. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur of disbelief and mounting rage. I had always known I was second place in my family's hierarchy of importance, but this went beyond emotional neglect. This was calculated financial exploitation. That night, I lay awake until dawn, replaying every family interaction, every dismissal of my needs, every celebration of Kimberly's whims. The pattern was clear, but seeing it with adult eyes was devastating. They had never respected me as an individual with valid needs and rights. They had seen me only as the reliable one who wouldn't cause problems, the one they could take from without consequences. By morning, something had hardened inside me. The hurt was still there, but beneath it grew a resolve I'd never needed before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to quietly accept their decision. I wasn't going to sacrifice my needs for family peace. Grandma Eleanor had left that money for me, and I intended to honor her wishes by fighting for it. The morning after my confrontation with my parents, I called in sick to work and spent the day researching trust law. I pulled out all the documentation Mr. Peterson had given me after Grandma Eleanor's death and read every paragraph, searching for clarity on my legal position. The trust terms were explicit. The funds were designated solely for my benefit, while my parents were listed as secondary trustees, able to help manage the account until I turned 35. All withdrawals were supposed to require my consent. Something wasn't adding up. I scheduled an emergency appointment with Mr. Peterson, but he couldn't see me for 3 days. In the meantime, my phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from my parents and Kimberly, alternating between guilt trips and anger. "You're ruining your sister's wedding with this tantrum," my mother texted. "I can't believe you'd be so selfish over money," wrote Kimberly. "Family is supposed to help each other. We need to resolve this before you damage relationships permanently," my father warned. I ignored them all, focusing instead on gathering information and planning my next steps. When I finally met with Mr. Peterson in his wood-paneled office, I brought all my documentation and bank statements. "This is highly irregular," he said, frowning as he reviewed the withdrawal history. "Your grandmother was very specific about the purpose of this trust. Let me make some inquiries." Armed with Mr. Peterson's preliminary legal advice, I drove to my parents' house again, this time with copies of the trust documents highlighted and annotated. I found them in the backyard, enjoying cocktails on their patio as if nothing were amiss. "We need to talk about the trust," I said, spreading the documents on their outdoor table. "What you've done isn't just morally wrong, it's legally questionable. The trust explicitly required my consent for any withdrawals." My father's face darkened. "We're your parents. We made decisions we thought were best for the family. It wasn't your decision to make," I countered. "And forging my signature on authorization forms is fraud." My mother gasped. "We did not forge anything. How dare you accuse us? Then how did you authorize the withdrawals?" "Because I certainly never signed anything." My father shifted uncomfortably. "I may have signed on your behalf. As your father, I have that right." "No, Dad, you don't. Not legally." "So what are you saying?" my mother demanded. "That you're going to sue your own parents? Destroy this family over money?" "I'm saying I want the money returned. It was mine. Grandma Eleanor left it specifically for me." "Well, it's gone," my father said flatly. "Spent on the house, the wedding, and Kimberly's business. We can't just conjure it back." "Then you'll need to figure out how to replace it," I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. "Sell investments. Take out a home equity loan. I don't care how you do it, but that money needs to be returned." My mother burst into tears. "I can't believe you'd do this to your sister. Her wedding is in 3 weeks. The boutique opening is the week after. You're trying to ruin everything because you're jealous of her. This isn't about jealousy. It's about theft. My father stood up, his face flushed with anger. That's enough. You've always been stubborn and self-centered, but this is beyond acceptable. If you persist with these ridiculous accusations, you can consider yourself uninvited from your sister's wedding and unwelcome in this house. I stared at him, something breaking and reforming inside me. If standing up for myself makes me unwelcome, then maybe I've never really been welcome here at all. That weekend, my parents called a family meeting at their house, including extended family members, my Uncle Frank, my father's brother, Aunt Patricia, and 3 cousins. I knew what this was, an attempt to pressure me through family opinion. I almost didn't go, but decided facing them was better than letting them control the narrative. The ambush began immediately. My mother had clearly been crying, and Kimberly sat beside her, holding her hand with a martyred expression. We've asked you all here because we're facing a family crisis, my father announced gravely. Mason is threatening legal action against us over money that was used to help Kimberly start her life with Ethan. My Aunt Patricia gasped. Mason, how could you? Before I could respond, Kimberly jumped in. He wants to ruin my wedding and destroy my business before it even opens. All because he's jealous that Mom and Dad are finally paying attention to me instead of his perfect grades and perfect job. The room erupted with overlapping voices, most expressing shock at my selfishness and greed. Only Uncle Frank remained silent, watching the scene with narrowed eyes. When I finally could speak, I kept my voice steady. What they're not telling you is that they took nearly $500,000 from a trust fund my grandmother established specifically for me. They did it without my knowledge or consent, which violates both the terms of the trust and basic law. Family helps family, my cousin Ryan said dismissively. What's the big deal? The big deal is they took everything I was counting on for my future without even asking. Would any of you be okay with someone taking your life savings without permission? More arguments ensued, with family members taking sides. The majority supported my parents and Kimberly. After all, they'd known for years that the golden child could do no wrong. Only Uncle Frank eventually moved to sit beside me. Robert, he said to my father when there was a brief lull, did you actually take money from Mason's trust without his knowledge? My father shifted uncomfortably. We made a parental decision. That's not what I asked. Uncle Frank interrupted. Did you take it without telling him? Yes. But, and did you forge his signature to do it? The room went silent. It wasn't forgery. My father insisted. I'm his father. I signed on his behalf. Uncle Frank shook his head. That's not how the law works, and you know it, Robert. You're an accountant, for God's sake. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Kimberly fled the room in tears, my mother following close behind. Several relatives left in awkward silence. In the end, only Uncle Frank remained with me in the living room. Your grandmother Eleanor was a wise woman, he said quietly. She saw this coming years ago. What do you mean? Why do you think she set up that trust for you specifically? She watched how Robert and Susan operated. She knew they'd always prioritize Kimberly's wants over your needs. She tried to protect you. The emotional toll of the conflict began affecting other areas of my life. I had trouble concentrating at work, my sleep was disrupted by stress dreams, and I started experiencing anxiety attacks, something I'd never dealt with before. My boss noticed my distraction and called me into his office to express concern. Whatever's going on in your personal life is bleeding into your work, Mason, he said kindly but firmly. Your last 2 client presentations were below your usual standard. I took a week of personal leave to focus on addressing the situation and caring for my mental health. During that time, I received an invitation to Kimberly's wedding, delivered by email rather than the formal paper invitations I knew other guests had received. The message was clear. I was being included only as a formality, expected to attend and pretend nothing was wrong. Through social media, I witnessed the extravagant preparations for Kimberly's wedding. She posted daily updates about her designer dress, the luxury venue, the expensive flowers, and the 5-tier cake, all purchased with my stolen future. Each post twisted the knife deeper. Not because I begrudged her happiness, but because of the profound injustice enabled by my parents. By the end of my leave week, something had changed within me. The initial shock and hurt had crystallized into determination. Years of being the good son, the accommodating brother, the one who never made waves had conditioned me to seek peace at any cost. But Grandma Eleanor had tried to teach me a different lesson, that my needs mattered too. It was time I finally learned that lesson. I called Mr. Peterson and told him I wanted to pursue all available legal options to recover my trust fund. The path ahead would be difficult, and would likely sever my family relationships permanently. But for the first time in my life, I was choosing to fight rather than accommodate. I was choosing myself. The morning after I decided to take legal action, Mr. Peterson called me with unexpected news. "Mason, I've been reviewing the complete trust documentation, including amendments your grandmother made in her final years. There's something you should know immediately." An hour later, I sat in his office as he pulled out a thick folder labeled Eleanor Davis Trust, Amendments and Safeguards. "Your grandmother was remarkably prescient," Mr. Peterson said, adjusting his reading glasses. "In the last amendment she made to your trust, approximately 6 months before her death, she installed what I can only describe as a tripwire." "A tripwire?" "Yes. A protective mechanism that activates automatically under specific circumstances." He tapped a highlighted paragraph. "According to this provision, any withdrawal from the trust exceeding $10,000 requires dual authorization, both from a trustee and from you personally, with signature verification. Additionally, a notification must be sent to both your primary email and physical address." "I never received any notifications," I said. "Exactly. And that triggers the safeguard." Mr. Peterson turned the page. "If withdrawals occur without proper dual authorization, or if notification procedures aren't followed, the trust automatically initiates a forensic audit and freezes all remaining funds pending investigation." I leaned forward. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying your grandmother anticipated something like this might happen. She built in protection that your parents couldn't have known about, a tripwire they triggered the moment they made that first unauthorized withdrawal. Why am I just learning about this now?" Mr. Peterson looked apologetic. "The bank should have notified both of us immediately when the irregular withdrawals began. It appears someone at the trust department overrode the notification system, something else we'll need to investigate." As if on cue, my phone rang with an unknown number. When I answered, a deep voice identified himself as Trevor Martin, Senior Manager at First National Trust. "Mr. Davis, I'm calling regarding some urgent irregularities with your trust account. Our system has flagged multiple high-value withdrawals that appear to lack proper authorization. We've initiated a freeze on the account pending investigation. Can you come to our main branch today?" 2 hours later, I sat in a conference room with Trevor and 2 bank officers from their fraud department. They spread documentation across the table: withdrawal slips, wire transfer authorizations, and signature cards. "These are the authorization forms for the 6 major withdrawals," Trevor explained, pointing to a stack of papers. "Each one bears what purports to be your signature. But our verification system has flagged inconsistencies." I examined the signatures. They were close approximations of my own, but slightly off in ways only I would notice. The loop of the M too rounded, the cross of the T too high. "That's not my signature," I confirmed. "I never authorized any of these withdrawals." Trevor nodded grimly. "That's what our forensic team suspected. The signatures appear to be attempts to replicate yours. But they don't match the signature card we have on file. My father likely signed them." I said quietly. He's had years of practice seeing my signature on documents. Mr. Davis, I need to be very clear about what this means, Trevor said, his expression serious. What we're discussing is fraud, specifically, forgery and unauthorized access to fiduciary funds. These are criminal offenses that carry significant penalties. The weight of his words settled on me. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. My parents had committed crimes that could potentially result in criminal charges. What happens now? I asked. We've already initiated an investigation and frozen the remaining funds, approximately $52,000. We'll be working to trace where the withdrawn money went and identify all parties involved in the unauthorized transactions. And my parents? They'll be contacted formally by our legal department about the investigation. If fraud is confirmed, which seems likely based on preliminary findings, they could face both civil penalties from the bank and potential criminal charges, depending on how the case progresses. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Frank. Your parents just called me in a panic. Something about the bank freezing accounts. Call me. I met Uncle Frank at a quiet coffee shop near his office. Unlike my father, who had pursued accounting, Uncle Frank had become a criminal defense attorney, a profession that might soon become relevant to my parents. The bank's investigating fraud, I explained after ordering coffee. Apparently Grandma Eleanor installed safeguards in the trust that triggered when my parents made unauthorized withdrawals. Uncle Frank gave a low whistle. Eleanor always was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. She must have suspected Robert might try something like this. What should I do, Uncle Frank? This has gone beyond family drama. The bank's talking about potential criminal charges. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. You have 3 basic options. First, you could try to stop the investigation. Tell the bank you don't want to pursue charges. That might mitigate some consequences. But the bank may proceed anyway since trust fraud affects their institution. What's the second option? Let the investigation run its course. Your parents will likely face substantial financial penalties at minimum, possibly criminal charges for fraud and forgery. I winced. Despite everything, the thought of my parents facing criminal charges was disturbing. And the third option? Negotiate a settlement. Your parents return the full amount plus interest and penalties. The bank gets their money back, and you might convince them not to press charges if everything's made whole. Where would my parents get $500,000? They claimed it's all spent on Kimberly's house, wedding, and business. Uncle Frank's expression hardened. They have options. They could take a home equity loan, sell investments, liquidate their vacation property on the Cape. They found money for Kimberly's wants. They can find money to fix their own mistake. That evening, I received a panicked call from my father. Mason. What have you done? He demanded, his voice shaking. We just received a letter from the bank about an investigation into fraudulent activities. They've frozen several of our accounts. I didn't do anything, Dad. The bank's security system flagged the unauthorized withdrawals automatically. Apparently, Grandma Eleanor built in safeguards you didn't know about. This is insanity. We're your parents. We were helping your sister. With money that wasn't yours to give. You need to call them off. Tell them this was a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. You forged my signature and took my money without permission. That's fraud by definition. My father's voice turned threatening. If you let this continue, it will destroy this family. Is that what you want? To see your mother and me humiliated? To ruin your sister's wedding in future? The old Mason would have backed down. Accepted responsibility for a problem he didn't create, sacrificed his needs for family peace. But I wasn't that person anymore. What I wanted was parents who respected me enough to treat me fairly. What I wanted was a sister who didn't expect to be given everything at my expense. What I wanted was a family that actually acted like one, supporting each member equally, not just the favorite. You're making a terrible mistake. My father warned before hanging up. Minutes later, my mother called, sobbing about how I was tearing the family apart. Then Kimberly, screaming that I was ruining her wedding out of spite. I let their calls go to voicemail after that, needing space to think. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at a framed photo of Grandma Eleanor and me from my college graduation. She had her arm around my shoulders, her face beaming with pride. You saw this coming, didn't you? I whispered to her image. You tried to protect me, even knowing you wouldn't be here. In that moment, I felt her strength flowing into me. I hadn't asked for this conflict. But now that it had come, I would face it with the dignity and resolve she had always seen in me, even when I couldn't see it in myself. 3 days after the bank froze the accounts, my parents called an emergency family meeting. The formal email invitation included Kimberly and Ethan, Uncle Frank, and me, notably missing the extended family members from the previous ambush. The location was set for their home at 7 p.m., with the ominous subject line, Critical Family Matter Mandatory Attendance. I arrived deliberately 5 minutes late, unwilling to subject myself to pre-meeting manipulation. Uncle Frank was already there, sitting stoically in an armchair, while my parents paced nervously. Kimberly sat on the couch, her makeup smeared from crying, with Ethan beside her looking increasingly uncomfortable. The atmosphere crackled with tension as I entered. My mother's face was pale, my father's flushed with anger. Neither spoke as I took a seat across from Kimberly. Thank you all for coming, my father finally began, his accountant's voice struggling for its usual control. We're facing a serious situation that affects this entire family. Just say it, Dad, Kimberly interrupted, glaring at me. Mason is pressing charges against you and Mom for helping me. He's trying to send his own parents to jail. That's not accurate, I replied calmly. The bank initiated an investigation when their security systems detected unauthorized withdrawals and forged signatures. I didn't request it. But you refused to stop it, my mother cried. You could tell them it was a misunderstanding. Uncle Frank cleared his throat. Susan, a bank fraud investigation isn't like a family disagreement you can just smooth over. The documents show clear evidence of forgery and misappropriation of trust funds. My father turned on him. Whose side are you on, Frank? I'm not on a side, Uncle Frank replied evenly. I'm stating legal facts. You forged Mason's signature to take money from a protected trust. That's fraud, plain and simple. We are his parents, my mother insisted, her voice rising hysterically. We have every right to make financial decisions for our children. Not for adult children, Uncle Frank countered. And not from a trust with explicit terms protecting the beneficiary. Mason is 32, not 12. Kimberly suddenly stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. This is all your fault. My wedding is in 2 weeks, and now everything's falling apart. The venue is threatening to cancel because the final payment is stuck in the frozen account. My boutique suppliers are demanding payment for inventory. Ethan and I might lose our house deposit. For the first time, Ethan spoke up, his expression confused. Wait, what do you mean payment is stuck? I thought your parents gave us the house down payment as a wedding gift from their savings. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Kimberly's eyes darted nervously between Ethan and my parents. They did, she said quickly. This is something else. No, it's not, I said quietly. Ethan, the down payment for your house, the money for the wedding, the boutique inventory, it all came from my trust fund. Money my grandmother left specifically for me that my parents took without permission. Ethan's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, and finally dismay. You told me your parents were helping us get started, he said to Kimberly. You never said anything about taking your brother's money. I didn't take anything, Kimberly protested. Mom and Dad handled all the financial arrangements. But you knew where the money was coming from, I pressed. You knew it was my trust fund. Kimberly's silence was confirmation enough. Ethan stood up, running his hands through his hair. I need some air, he muttered, heading for the door. Ethan, wait! Kimberly called, but he kept walking. The front door closing firmly behind him. My mother rounded on me. See what you've done! You're destroying your sister's relationship now, too! Something inside me snapped. Years of suppressed feelings, the hurt, the resentment, the constant emotional neglect, rose to the surface. I didn't do this, I said, my voice low but intense. You did. You and Dad and Kimberly. You took what wasn't yours to take. You violated my trust and my rights. You treated me like my future didn't matter compared to Kimberly's wants. And now that there are consequences, you're doing what you've always done, blaming me for problems you created. That's not fair, my father protested. Isn't it? My entire life, you've favored Kimberly. You missed my science fair for her dance recital. You left my high school graduation early for her headache. You dismissed my achievements while celebrating her mediocrity. And now you've stolen my financial future to fund her lifestyle, and somehow I'm the villain for not smiling and accepting it? Years of carefully maintained composure crumbled as words poured out of me. I outlined every remembered slight, every double standard. Every time my needs had been sacrificed for Kimberly's desires. Uncle Frank sat silently, while my parents and Kimberly stared in shock at my unprecedented rebellion. You never treated us that way. Kimberly protested weakly. You wouldn't know if they did, I replied. You were too busy enjoying the benefits to notice the imbalance. My father attempted to regain control of the situation. This melodramatic rewriting of history doesn't change the current problem. The bank has frozen our accounts. They're talking about pressing charges. We could face criminal penalties. Yes, I agreed. Those are indeed the consequences of committing fraud. We are your parents, my mother wailed. How can you do this to us? I'm not doing anything to you. I'm simply refusing to protect you from the consequences of your own actions for once. The color drained from my father's face as the reality of their situation finally seemed to sink in. Mason, he said, his voice suddenly softer, almost pleading. We can fix this. We'll find a way to repay the money. We can sell the Cape House. Liquidate some investments. The same options you had before you decided to steal from me. I noted. Interesting how they only became viable when you faced consequences. What do you want from us? My mother asked tearfully. I want what I've always wanted, to be treated with basic respect and fairness. I want the money returned to my trust fund, with interest. I want acknowledgement that what you did was wrong. And I want you to understand that our relationship will never be the same, regardless of how this legal situation resolves. Kimberly, who had been unnaturally quiet, suddenly spoke. What about my wedding? My business? Are you really going to let everything I've worked for collapse? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw for the first time not the golden child who had tormented my childhood but a deeply insecure woman who had never developed the skills to handle adversity. You haven't worked for any of it, Kimberly. That's the problem. Everything has been handed to you, including my money. As for your wedding and business, those are secondary to resolving the legal issues our parents have created. The meeting continued for another hour, cycling through blame, tears, negotiations, and finally, the beginnings of resignation as my parents realized I wouldn't back down. Uncle Frank offered to help them navigate the legal process and negotiate with the bank, but made it clear he wouldn't help them escape responsibility. As I prepared to leave, my father made one last attempt. Mason, please. We're still your family. I paused at the door. Family isn't just about blood relation, Dad. It's about how you treat each other. Maybe someday we can rebuild something, but it will never be what it was. I won't accept being treated as less than anymore. As I walked to my car, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Ethan, who had apparently been sitting in his car the entire time. I didn't know, he said simply. About the money. About any of it. I believe you. He ran his hand through his hair, clearly distressed. What happens now? That depends partly on you, I replied. Are you willing to return your portion of the stolen funds? The house down payment? But we'd lose the house. Yes. You would. He was quiet for a long moment. I need to think. About everything. As he walked away, I realized something important had shifted. For the first time, someone in Kimberly's orbit was considering that actions have consequences, that wants don't automatically override others' needs. It was a small victory, but significant. That night, as I drove home, I felt neither triumph nor satisfaction, only a complicated mixture of grief for the family relationships I'd lost and relief at finally standing up for myself. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in my life, I was walking it on my own terms. The week following our confrontation passed in a blur of legal consultations and bank meetings. Trevor from First National Trust called with the preliminary findings of their investigation. Mr. Davis, our forensic team has completed the initial review, he explained. The evidence confirms what we suspected. Your signature was forged on all 6 withdrawal authorizations. The required notifications to you were deliberately disabled by someone with administrative access to the trust management system. Someone inside the bank? I asked, surprised. We believe so. We're conducting an internal investigation to identify the responsible party. There's a possibility your father leveraged professional connections to circumvent security protocols. This new information added another layer of calculation to what my parents had done. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a carefully orchestrated plan executed over months. The bank's legal team informed me they were preparing to formally press charges for trust fraud, forgery, and wire fraud, serious offenses that could potentially result in criminal prosecution. As the primary victim, I would have some influence over how aggressively they pursued these charges, but the decision wouldn't be entirely mine. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of the frozen accounts spread through my family. Kimberly called daily, alternating between tearful pleas and angry accusations. Her wedding venue had indeed cancelled after the final payment failed to process. Several vendors had withdrawn, unwilling to risk non-payment. Ethan remained distant. According to her increasingly frantic messages, spending long hours at work and avoiding discussion of their future. This is all your fault, she sobbed in one voicemail. You've ruined everything I've worked for. The irony of her claiming to have worked for anything bought with my stolen money wasn't lost on me, but I took no pleasure in her distress. Despite everything, she was still my sister, and watching her confront reality for perhaps the first time in her life was sobering rather than satisfying. 10 days after our confrontation, Uncle Frank called with unexpected news. Your parents want to make a settlement offer, he said without preamble. They're desperate to avoid criminal charges. What kind of settlement? They're proposing to return the full amount taken from your trust, plus 10% interest. They'll sell their Cape Cod property, liquidate their investment portfolio, and take a home equity line of credit on their primary residence if necessary. That's quite a change from the money is gone, I noted. Amazing how the prospect of criminal charges clarifies financial options, Uncle Frank replied dryly. Do you want to hear the rest of their proposal? There's more? They're requesting that in exchange for full repayment, you use your influence with the bank to drop any criminal charges. They'll accept financial penalties and a formal reprimand from the banking commission, but they want to avoid the criminal record. I considered this. What's your legal advice? Professionally speaking, it's a reasonable offer. You'd get your money back with interest. And they'd still face significant consequences without the life-destroying impact of criminal fraud charges. However, he added, this is more than a legal decision. This is about your relationship with your family moving forward. Only you can decide what feels right. After careful consideration and consultation with both Uncle Frank and Mr. Peterson, I agreed to the settlement terms with several conditions: full repayment within 60 days, a legally binding admission of wrongdoing, and their agreement to respect my boundaries moving forward, including limited contact until I initiated otherwise. The bank was surprisingly amenable to the arrangement once full restitution was guaranteed. Their primary concern was recovering the funds and identifying the internal accomplice who had helped circumvent security protocols. That investigation led to the dismissal of a senior trust administrator who had been a golf buddy of my father's for 15 years. My parents sold their Cape Cod vacation home at a slight loss for quick liquidity, liquidated approximately 70% of their investment portfolio, and took a $150,000 home equity line of credit to reach the full repayment amount. The financial strain was significant but not ruinous. They would maintain their primary residence and enough investments to eventually rebuild their retirement savings, albeit with a several-year setback. Kimberly's situation evolved differently, with her elaborate wedding plans derailed and boutique opening delayed indefinitely. She was forced to confront financial reality perhaps for the first time in her adult life. The wedding was postponed and drastically downsized from the original 300-guest extravaganza to a modest ceremony with 50 close family members and friends. Ethan, to his credit, insisted on transparency moving forward. He contacted me directly 2 weeks after the confrontation. "I want you to know I had no idea about the source of our down payment," he said when we met for coffee. "I assumed it was genuinely a gift from Kimberly's parents from their own funds." "I believe you," I assured him. "You seemed genuinely shocked at the meeting." He nodded, turning his coffee cup slowly. "I've always known Kimberly was a bit privileged in her outlook, but I never realized the extent of the family dynamic until that night. Hearing how you were treated growing up, it made me see her differently." "Are you still getting married?" "Yes, but on very different terms. We've postponed until next spring. I've insisted we scale back significantly and pay for everything ourselves, from our actual earnings. No more gifts that turn out to be someone else's money." He looked up. "And I've told Kimberly she needs therapy to work through some of her entitlement issues if our marriage is going to succeed." "How did she take that?" "About as well as you'd expect at first. But after the initial tantrum, something seemed to click. I think having her perfect life plan collapse was actually necessary. She's never had to face consequences before." The settlement process moved forward over the next several weeks. As the reality of their actions and the narrowly avoided criminal charges sank in, my parents' initial anger gradually gave way to something resembling shame. They avoided direct contact with me outside of necessary legal communications, perhaps finding it easier to temporarily pretend I didn't exist than to face what they had done. The extended family's reactions split along predictable lines. Some relatives, particularly on my mother's side, continued to view me as the villain who had turned on family over just money. Others, after learning the full extent of what had happened, reached out with messages of support and, in some cases, apologies for their initial judgment. Throughout this period, I maintained minimal contact with my immediate family, needing space to process my feelings and rebuild my sense of security. I focused on work, reconnecting with friends I had neglected during the crisis, and attending regular sessions with a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Lynn Barrett helped me recognize patterns I had normalized throughout my life: the constant self-sacrifice, the internalized belief that my needs were secondary, the habit of seeking validation from people incapable of providing it. "What your parents did was financial abuse," she said during one session. "But it was an escalation of emotional patterns that were present throughout your childhood. The favoritism, the dismissal of your needs, the expectation that you would always accommodate, these were the foundation that allowed them to eventually feel entitled to your trust fund." Working with Dr. Barrett helped me understand that my family's dysfunction wasn't my fault or my responsibility to fix. It also helped me recognize that the anger and hurt I felt were valid, not signs of being selfish or greedy, as my family had suggested, but natural responses to profound betrayal. 45 days after the settlement agreement, the full amount plus interest was returned to a newly established trust account with enhanced security protocols and no secondary trustees. The bank officially closed their investigation without pressing criminal charges. Though my parents received formal censures from the banking commission that would remain on their financial records permanently. With the immediate crisis resolved and my financial future secured once again, I found myself at a crossroads. The family I had known was irrevocably changed. The illusions I had maintained about my place within it were shattered. But in their place was something new and unexpected, a sense of liberation. For the first time in my life, I was free from the obligation to be the perpetual accommodator, the reliable disappointment absorber, the one who always gave way. I was free to define family on my own terms moving forward. And that freedom, though born from pain, felt like the first breath after years of subtle suffocation. 6 months after the settlement, I closed on a modest but well-located 2-bedroom condo in a historic Boston neighborhood. The purchase used a portion of my recovered trust fund as down payment, honoring Grandma Eleanor's wish that the money help establish my foundation for the future. As I unpacked boxes in my new home, I came across the framed photo of Grandma Eleanor from my college graduation. I placed it prominently on my living room bookshelf. A reminder of the one family member who had truly seen and valued me for who I was. The day after my move, I received an unexpected text from Kimberly. "Can we talk? Just the two of us." We met at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our homes. The Kimberly who arrived was noticeably different from the entitled sister I'd known all my life. She wore minimal makeup, simple clothing, and most strikingly, lacked the demanding energy that had always surrounded her. "I don't really know how to start," she said after we'd ordered. "I've been in therapy for 4 months now." Ethan insisted, and he was right. She twisted her engagement ring, a much smaller diamond than her original. "I've been learning about family dynamics and narcissistic parenting. It's been eye-opening." I waited, unsure where this was heading. "I never saw it," she continued. "How differently they treated us. It was just normal to me that I got what I wanted and you didn't. My therapist says I was the golden child and you were the scapegoat. Those roles weren't our fault. We were just kids playing the parts we were assigned. That doesn't excuse taking my trust fund," I said quietly. "No, it doesn't." She met my eyes directly. "Nothing excuses that. I knew the money was coming from your trust. Mom and Dad presented it as family money that was being redistributed more fairly, but I knew it was yours. I just didn't care because I wanted what I wanted." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Mason. Truly sorry." The apology was unexpected and disarming. Throughout our childhood and adult years, I couldn't recall Kimberly ever apologizing sincerely for anything. "What happened with your wedding?" I asked, changing the subject slightly. "We had a small ceremony last month. Immediate family and close friends only. We paid for everything ourselves," Ethan insisted. "It was nothing like what I'd planned, but..." She smiled slightly. "It was actually nice. Meaningful. No one was there who didn't genuinely care about us." "And the boutique?" "On hold indefinitely. I'm working as an assistant manager at a retail store to learn the business properly from the ground up. My boss says I have good instincts for merchandising, but I need to understand operations before trying to run my own place." She laughed softly. "It's the first real job I've stuck with for more than a few months. Turns out working is satisfying when you're actually learning and contributing." Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from our childhood to the current state of the family. My parents were struggling to rebuild their financial stability and marriage after the crisis. Several extended family members had distanced themselves once the full story emerged. Uncle Frank had become an unexpected source of support for both of us, offering wisdom without judgment. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" Kimberly asked eventually. I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't a single decision. It's a process. I'm working on letting go of anger because it primarily hurts me, not them. But trust? That would require them to demonstrate significant change over time. So far, I've seen minimal evidence of that. They miss you, she offered. They talk about you. They miss the version of me that accommodated their behavior without challenge. I'm not that person anymore. As we prepared to leave, Kimberly hesitated, then asked, "Do you think we could try to have some kind of relationship moving forward? Not pretending nothing happened, but something new? Something healthier?" The question touched something tender within me. Despite everything, she was still my sister, the only person who shared my specific childhood experience, however differently we had experienced it. "I think we can try," I said finally. Slowly. With boundaries. And with the understanding that I'll walk away if old patterns resurface. The process of healing, both within myself and with various family members, progressed unevenly over the following year. My parents eventually requested a meeting through Uncle Frank, who offered his home as neutral territory. The conversation was difficult and at times painfully honest. My father, stripped of his usual authoritative persona, admitted that his own childhood had taught him to value appearance over authenticity, achievement over emotional connection. "I pushed Kimberly because she struggled," he explained, "and ignored you because you succeeded without my help. It was wrong, and I didn't even recognize the pattern until everything fell apart." My mother, whose enabling of family dysfunction had been equally damaging, had more difficulty accepting responsibility. Her apologies frequently included qualifiers. "We were doing what we thought was best," or "We never meant to hurt you," reflecting her ongoing struggle to fully acknowledge the harm caused. I established clear boundaries for our limited contact moving forward: no unsolicited advice, no criticism disguised as concern, no expecting me to accommodate family gatherings at my expense. Most importantly, no financial entanglements of any kind. These boundaries were tested repeatedly in the early months, but I remained firm, willing to end contact rather than return to old patterns. Throughout this period of family reconstruction, I found unexpected fulfillment in using my experience to help others. What began as casual conversations with younger colleagues about financial literacy evolved into regular volunteer work with a nonprofit organization that taught financial independence skills to young adults aging out of foster care. These young people, many of whom had experienced family dysfunction more severe than my own, responded to my story not with pity but with recognition. They understood what it meant to have boundaries violated, to have their needs dismissed as unimportant, to be expected to accommodate others at their own expense. Working with them helped me transform my painful experience into something constructive. Each time I helped a young person understand how to protect their financial future or recognize unhealthy relationship patterns, I honored Grandma Eleanor's legacy in a new way. 2 years after the trust fund crisis, I invited Uncle Frank to dinner at my condo to mark the anniversary of its purchase. "You've done well for yourself," he observed, looking around the tastefully decorated space. "Not just financially. You seem at peace." "More than I was," I agreed. "I still have moments of anger when I think about what happened. But they're less frequent, less intense. Eleanor would be proud of you," he said, raising his glass. "Not just for standing up for yourself, but for how you've grown through this whole mess." I wish she could have seen it. She did see it, Uncle Frank replied with certainty. "She saw your strength long before you recognized it yourself. That's why she set up that trust with safeguards. She knew you'd eventually need to break free from the family dynamic, and she gave you both the resources and the protection to do it." As we finished dinner, I showed Uncle Frank my latest project, a financial literacy workshop specifically designed for young adults from controlling or dysfunctional families. The curriculum covered not just practical financial skills but the emotional aspects of financial independence, setting boundaries, recognizing manipulation, building confidence in decision-making. "This is important work," Uncle Frank said as he reviewed the materials. "You're turning your experience into something that will help others avoid similar pain." His words stayed with me long after he left. In the quiet of my home, my own space, purchased with funds that represented my grandmother's belief in my worth, I reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. The trust fund crisis had been devastating, but it had also been necessary. Without that catalyzing betrayal, I might have continued indefinitely in the role assigned to me, the accommodating son, the reliable brother, the one whose needs always came last. The pain had forced me to recognize my own value and fight for it, something Grandma Eleanor had tried to teach me more gently throughout her life. My relationship with my family would never return to what it had been, but perhaps that was for the best. The old relationship had been built on unhealthy dynamics and unspoken expectations. Whatever new connections we might forge moving forward would at least be based on reality rather than illusion, on mutual respect rather than exploitation. As I placed Grandma Eleanor's photograph back on the shelf, I whispered a thank you to her, not just for the financial protection she had provided, but for seeing in me the strength I hadn't yet recognized in myself. Her belief had been the seed from which my current life had grown. The most profound lesson of my journey wasn't about money, or even family dynamics. It was about self-worth. I had learned painfully but permanently that my needs mattered. That boundaries weren't selfish but necessary. That standing up for myself wasn't betraying family but honoring my own humanity. I would carry the scars of my family's betrayal, but I would also carry the wisdom gained from surviving it. And that wisdom, hard-won and irreplaceable, was perhaps the most valuable inheritance of all. If you've stayed with me through this story, I'd love to hear about a time you had to stand up for yourself against people you loved. Was it worth it? What did you learn? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this resonated with you. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's an act of self-respect that ultimately benefits everyone. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to honor your own worth, even when it's difficult.